This is NHK World Japan. We bring you the news from Radio Japan at 11 hours UTC on Friday, August 2nd. I'm Yoshio Gasawara.
And I'm Hiroko Kitadai.
In our top stories, Japan's cabinet is going ahead with a plan to remove South Korea from a list of nations entitled to simplified export control procedures.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will impose an additional 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese products starting September 1st.
And a nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia has expired. And now the news in detail. Japan's cabinet is moving ahead with a plan to remove South Korea from a list of nations entitled to simplified export control procedures. The new measure will take effect on August 28th. Japanese Trade Minister Hiroshige Seko says the cabinet's decision is a review of the implementation of Japanese export policies in response to some deficiencies in South Korea's export control system and its application. He says Japan has no intention for this to alter relations with South Korea, and the decision is not meant as a countermeasure against certain issues. The decision represents a second round of tightening on export controls for the country, following an increase in screening for materials used to make semiconductors and display panels. Japanese officials say South Korea mishandled high-tech materials that can be used for military purposes. They say the country has also failed to introduce a system that's required to retain the status. They stress that the latest measure means that South Korea is in the same category as other countries in Asia. South Korean President Moon Jae-in says Japan has ignored his country and the international community's efforts to diplomatically solve the situation and has made matters worse. He also sternly warns Japan that it's responsible for whatever happens from here onward. He says his country will not sit back and allow the instigator to continue its aggressive posture.
In a related story, South Korea says it will remove Japan from its list of nations entitled to simplified export control procedures in response to a similar move by the Japanese government. The South Korean government announced on Friday that it will tighten controls on exports to Japan following Tokyo's decision earlier in the day to strip South Korea of its preferential trade status. South Korea also said it will file a complaint with the World Trade Organization as soon as possible over Japan's recent moves, which it says are a violation of international trade rules.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will impose an additional 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese products starting September 1st. If the measure goes into effect, almost all imports from China would be subject to additional tariffs. Trump made the announcement on his Twitter account on Thursday. He wrote that the targeted amount does not include $250 billion worth of products already subject to an additional tariff of 25%. Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed in their June summit to resume trade talks, but ministerial-level negotiations in Shanghai earlier this week failed to make progress. Trump said China failed to honor its agreement to buy large quantities of agricultural products from the U.S. He later told reporters he could further increase the tariff rate above 25%, depending on the progress of talks between him and Xi. On the New York Stock Exchange, share prices fell sharply following Trump's tweet. The Dow ended the day down 280 points, or just over 1%. On the New York Foreign Exchange, traders bought the safe haven yen as the dollar weakened to the lower 107 yen level.
China's foreign ministry has warned of retaliatory action against the U.S. plan to impose additional tariffs on Chinese imports. Spokesperson Hua Chunying met with reporters on Friday. She said, "We will have to take countermeasures to defend our country's fundamental interests. The United States will be responsible for the consequences." The spokesperson said China will not make any concessions on issues connected to important principles in trade negotiations.
Share prices on the Tokyo Stock Exchange plunged across the board on Friday. Its key index briefly fell more than 500 points. The benchmark Nikkei 225 ended Friday's session at 21,087, down 453 points from Thursday's close. The broader Topix index fell 33 points to 1,533. Market sources say U.S. President Trump's announcement of tariffs on a wider range of Chinese goods has stoked fears of prolonged trade friction between the two countries. They say there's a sense of crisis that the trade dispute could deal a further blow to Japanese businesses. The sources say lower share prices in other parts of Asia and the stronger yen prompted the sharp drop across the board in Tokyo. They say more investors are apparently watching how China will respond to the latest U.S. move.
You're listening to Radio Japan of the NHK World Japan Network. A nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia has expired. The two nuclear powers plan to develop new missiles, raising concerns about an intensifying arms race. The U.S. State Department announced that the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, expired on Friday. In February, Washington notified Moscow that it would withdraw from the INF because of Russia's alleged violations. Russia responded that it would also suspend its obligations under the treaty. The pact became null and void on Friday under the provision that it would expire 6 months after the U.S. notice. The treaty was signed by the U.S. and the former Soviet Union in 1987 during the Cold War. It prohibited the production, position, and test firing of ground-based ballistic and cruise missiles with a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. The two countries have scrapped more than 2,600 nuclear missiles. In recent years, the U.S. and Russia have accused each other of violating the treaty. They also said that China, which was not involved in the INF, was increasing its stockpile of intermediate-range missiles. The U.S. plans to develop ground-based intermediate-range missiles. Russia plans to convert its sea-launched cruise missiles to land-based versions. The U.S. and Russia are calling for a new nuclear disarmament framework involving China and other missile-armed countries. But Beijing has declined negotiations for a new deal. Military analysts have expressed concern about a new arms race between major powers following the expiration of the treaty that helped to promote nuclear disarmament for about 3 decades.
The U.S. Defense Department says North Korea has launched 2 missiles, marking the 3rd set of launches in just over a week. A South Korean government spokesperson says they were likely a new type of short-range ballistic missile. The launches reportedly happened early Friday morning. Seoul says they flew about 220 kilometers and reached an altitude of about 25 kilometers. U.S. President Trump is downplaying the situation, saying he has no problem with the launch. He added that it won't affect negotiations because they didn't have an agreement on short-range missiles. He said he thinks it's very much under control. Japan's defense minister says he's monitoring the situation closely. Takeshi Iwaya says he ordered ministry officials to continue conducting surveillance to deal with any actions from North Korea. Friday's launch is the 3rd in the past 8 days. North Korea says the previous 2 launches were to test a new guided rocket system and a new type of tactical guided weapon. Observers say the launch was to protest a planned joint military drill between the U.S. and South Korea. In June, Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un agreed to restart denuclearization talks, but little progress has been made since. The UN Security Council discussed the recent developments on Thursday. Following the meeting, Britain, France, and Germany said North Korean sanctions will remain in place until Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile programs are dismantled.
Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev arrived on Etorofu Island on Friday afternoon. Etorofu is one of the 4 Russian-controlled islands that Japan claims. This is Medvedev's 4th visit to the islands. In 2010, when he was president, he became the first Russian leader to visit one of the islands when he went to Kunashiri. As Prime Minister, he made another visit to Kunashiri in 2012 and went to Etorofu in 2015. Russia controls the islands. Japan claims them. The Japanese government maintains the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. It says the islands were illegally occupied after World War II. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said on Friday that the visit runs counter to Japan's position on the territorial issue. Japan's foreign ministry says it plans to lodge a protest with the Russian government via a diplomatic channel once the visit is confirmed.
The Kyoto Prefectural Police Headquarters have released the names of 10 of the 35 victims who died in the arson attack on a Kyoto animation studio last month. Police investigators have identified all the victims of the July 18th attack, but the headquarters had withheld the information until now. Chief Investigator Ryoji Nishiyama told a news conference on Friday that police released the names of 10 victims because their families consented. He said the bereaved families are in deep shock and they need time to accept the deaths. He also said Kyoto Animation has been opposed to releasing the victims' names. He indicated that police will try to obtain approval from relatives of the other victims and the company. One of the victims is Yasuhiro Takemoto, who directed many Kyoto Animation shows, including the hit TV anime series Lucky Star.
Sweltering heat continues over wide areas of Japan, with temperatures topping 38 degrees Celsius in some locations. Weather officials are urging people to take precautions against heat stroke. The meteorological agency says a high-pressure system brought clear skies to most parts of the country on Friday. Gifu City, Gifu Prefecture, and Toyonaka City, Osaka Prefecture had the highest temperatures at 38.5 degrees. The daytime high in Kurume City, Fukuoka Prefecture was 38.4 degrees. In central Tokyo, the mercury reached 35.1 degrees. Evening temperatures remain over 35 degrees in some parts of the Kanto and Kyushu regions. Hot weather is also forecast for Saturday. A high of 38 is expected in the cities of Kumamoto and Saga, 37 in Kyoto, and 36 in Osaka and Hiroshima. The temperature in central Tokyo and Nagoya is forecast to climb to 35 degrees.
The severe heat wave that's gripping Japan has likely caused the deaths of at least 6 people in 4 prefectures. NHK has learned that the 6 in their 50s to 80s died on Friday after falling unconscious at home or in a car. 3 of the deaths were reported in the northern prefecture of Hokkaido, which is normally cooler than other parts of the country. Among the 3 is a man in his 60s who was found unconscious in his bed shortly after midnight in Mikasa City. He was rushed to hospital but was pronounced dead from heat stroke. A woman in her 60s in Noboribetsu City was found collapsed in the toilet by a family member early in the morning. Paramedics who confirmed her death say her body temperature was above 40 degrees Celsius. They believe she died of heat stroke. And that was the news from Radio Japan of the NHK World Japan Network. I'm Yoshio Gasawara.
And I'm Hiroko Kitadai.